Welcome back to Absolute Units, the official podcast of the Museum of English Rural Life.
I'm Ollie Douglas, the museum's curator of collections.
And I'm Joe Vaughan, the museum's social media manager.
So last time around, we chatted with award-winning photographer Amy Bateman, and we talked all about her work, 40 Farms, which explores the lives and the challenges of contemporary farmers living in the Lake District and across Cumbria.
This time, we're chatting about Amy's route into farming, as well as photography. We cover the history of photography of commercial farms, like those featured in 40 Farms, as well as the strength of that within our collection.
So we also talk a little bit about the fourth agricultural revolution, which we're supposedly living through right now. So that brings to farming new digital technologies, precision farming, vertical farming, loads of changes, maybe. Enjoy.
Welcome back to Absolute Units, Amy.
Thanks very much, Joe. It's great to be back. Long time no see.
Long time no see.
So last time we spoke, Amy, we spoke about 40 Farms, the amazing project that you've done, about your life as a farmer and about farming in Cumbria. This time we're going to talk in much more detail about your practice as a photographer. So I wonder whether we could start by you telling us a little bit about how you trained, how you came into photography. What have you done other than farming?
Yeah, of course. Well, actually, I was a physiotherapist and I had my own clinic in Kendal. I was an entrepreneur, I was running my own business, and having children was never going to change me. Then the hormones kicked in and it really did. And I ended up having twins. So we fertilised one and got one free. And then I had a third very quickly. So we had 3 under 3 and 3 in nappies. And we realised that childcare was so expensive that I'd be working full time to only bring out $5,000 a year.
I briefly had 3 under 3 at one stage as well, so I can identify with that.
That's why I have to dye my hair.
Is that like grey. 30 under 30, but in nappies?
It's costly in nappies.
Costly, more costly, yeah.
And in mental health and exhaustion and energy and money.
Just went as a blur. But at that time, I realised I couldn't keep the clinic going. It was demanding too much from me. So I let that lapse and eventually retired from the profession. And we made the decision to stay at home. So I would farm alongside my husband, bring the children up at home. And we didn't really plan much further than that. After a couple of years, when the kids became toddlers, I realised I needed something for me. I wasn't in a position with my background that I could help make farming decisions because I wasn't too familiar with them. I could do the work, but I wasn't, like my husband's, very scientific with his approach to the farm. So I was becoming involved, but I couldn't have any autonomy in how the farm was run. And so I picked up a camera, because I had one, started taking it out with me, and started sharing my pictures on social media because, of course, the social isolation while you're at home with kids is quite vast. But further social isolation from being a farmer. We're about 10 minutes outside of Kendal, which is in the edge of the Lake District in Cumbria, but it is very rural. We don't have neighbours that I can go and knock on their door. They're not immediately next to us. Our neighbour is across a couple of fields, so we don't see them very much. And I reached out to social media to build a bridge connection with the world that I wasn't getting from seeing people regularly, because as a physio, I'd see people all the time. And if you go out to your 9 to 5, you see people that you work with. And that wasn't happening, so I kind of missed that as well. Very quickly, by sharing my images online, particularly on Twitter, I found a group of fantastic photographers that were really complimentary with feedback. They would give you positive criticism, negative criticism, whatever you felt you needed, you could ask for. And so my access to photography grew because I was looking at their images and I was sharing my images. But what I found is I'd actually win some simple competitions quite quickly. One of the major competitions I won was Photo Speed Photographer of the Year in 2018. And I'm actually now an ambassador for them. They're a print company based down in Bath, doing photography papers. And then in 2019, I won, or 2020, I won British Life Photographer of the Year. And it was with a picture that's in the book.
We put a link to the photo in the show notes.
So the photograph depicts me feeding pet lambs in a stable at home on our farm, and it's about 10 o'clock at night. And at that time of year in spring, I feel like I'm the only one working. Everybody else is tucked up at home in their beds or sat in front of the telly. And I'm out there giving these pet lambs their very last feed. Now, we call them pet lambs, but they're orphan lambs or cade lambs. There's different terminology depending on which part of the country you're from. These lambs may still have mothers out there, but for whatever reason, I'm having to hand rear them. Their mother might not have had enough milk, may have had a problem lambing, might be unwell, for whatever reason. So that last feed is really important to get them through the night to make sure that the next day they're still alive. And I'm the pet lamb queen at lambing time. That is my role. The picture itself depicts me sitting on a stool in the darkness, but we've got this heat lamp that's keeping one lamb a little bit warmer in replacement from its mother's warmth behind a hurdle. And out of the whole series of shots, there was just one photograph where 3 of the lambs came and stood next to this hurdle with me. And there was only one frame out of all the pictures I took that night. But I had the camera on a tripod in the corner of the room, and I've got the shutter button in my left hand. And so that poor lamb that I was feeding had its feed so disrupted so many times because I'd hop up and go and check my settings and see what the photo was like that I'd just taken. I can have so many sensations wrapped up in that photograph. I adore the photograph because for me, I can feel the warmth of the heat off the heat lamp, but I can feel the cold shadows creeping up my back. I can hear the rustle of straw as the pet lambs potter around by my feet. I can feel the warmth of the lamb coming through my waterproof trousers as it sits on my lap. And I can smell the milk in the milk powder, the bottle I'm feeding to them. So to have such an all-encompassing sensory photo, then go on to win a significant photo competition, and it's British Life Photographer of the Year. And it was sponsored by Sony, and that's how I now use Sony cameras. And it was just quite a remarkable image to have been chosen to win that sort of competition. And I felt really privileged because I'm an agricultural photographer. I love agriculture, and here I am with a platform being able to bring people to our farm through my imagery and show them what really happens. And so it was a brilliant opportunity to launch myself as a commercial photographer. We wrote a business plan on the back of it. We set up the glamping pods for experiential tourism that we offer at home on the farm. And my career has really leapfrogged on the back of winning that competition. And since COVID, it's never run again. So I'm still British Life Photographer of the Year.
Wow.
So if I'm still British Life Photographer of the Year when I'm sat in my nursing home,
reigning
aged
British
90,
Life Photographer of the Year.
I'll say I'm still British Life Photographer of the Year.
So we'll have to refer to that in our publicity.
Yeah, I'm struck also by the fact that a lot of this is rooted in that social media experience as well. So I'm sitting at the table with our social media person, Joe, and with you, Amy, and there's a connection here, the power of social media as a medium for sharing that visual content. And also, I mean, the museum's major success on social media, the absolute unit that gives its name to this podcast, was, of course, an image of a sheep. So again, struck by the degree to which images of sheep, of lambing time, really resonate. They're powerful, they're emotive, they connect.
And if you'd like to know more about the backstory of the Absolute Unit, go back and check out our first episode of the podcast where we spoke to our former social media manager, Adam Kazari, who posted that tweet back in 2018.
There's something else you were saying about your background as a physiotherapist and this sort of segueing through into photography. I have a sister who's a physiotherapist, so I've had some conversations with her about the degree to which it's a very personal, sort of intimate experience talking with those clients and people that you're treating. This comes through amazingly powerfully in some of your work, the degree to which you're clearly sitting, speaking to those people. The portraiture is intimate. It's really close. You can get a sense of who those people are and what their lives are like. I wonder whether you talk a little bit about that. Is that a strong component of things? Because obviously it's offset against other bits of your work, which are about farming practice, they're about landscapes, they're about bigger, perhaps less personal spaces. But some of those most powerful works are the bits where you're in that individual room, you're right up close with people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ollie. And I find as I'm progressing as a photographer, I'm actually using an awful lot of my skills that have transferred over. The success of 40 Farms has been able to tell the stories succinctly in a way that I had to get to the nitty gritty. And of course, as a physio, I'd have half an hour to find out somebody's problem, what really triggers them. And in a way, I had to do the same with the farmers. They haven't got all day for me to try and work out where the issues were, what themes we were going to cover. And so those transferable skills really help the interview process for the narrative that runs alongside my images.
It's really interesting, the diagnostic skill.
Totally. But equally, those skills of being able to interview and relate to people and have empathy and draw out the information from them helps as a photographer because they get comfortable with me and will look at the camera and they don't mind me being there. So it's building those relationships as well. I have no doubt that that probably added to the success of being able to tell the stories accurately. I have another project that I've just done, which was all portraiture, and those skills, again, were really, really important with actually getting people to engage with me and my camera. But back to the farming thing, is a real factor with them being honest and open with me about their stories was the fact that I'm a farmer. I'm not just an outsider who studied photography. I actually can relate to them. I know the questions to ask. I can be a lot more succinct and get into the problem because I understand the technology, the terminology. And so that really helped as well. And strangely, I think being a female really helped. If I was a male farmer photographer going and asking other male farmer photographers, because there's obviously a lot of male stories in there will have been an element of maybe holding back, not wanting to necessarily commit the full truth for competition elements, holding your cards close to your chest. But being a female, people opened up to me more. And it was really quite amusing during a lot of the interviews how many people would say, oh, and off the record, and, I'd love to talk to you about this, but I don't want it to go in the book. And I got a lot of that. Now, I know that comes from me being open and being a physio in my past life, but I think being a female farmer actually really helped in that sense. I'm not saying that men can't do that, but I do think there was a lot more openness.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think that sense of a very non-clinical sense of sympathy comes through in all of your photos as well. I mean, that sense of trust, and there is that like emotional depth in one of these images. You can tell that they came out of very raw and strongly sympathetic interactions.
So I'm reminded of, we have a series of people stories in the galleries. So that anecdotal, individual, sort of personal portraiture approach to things, telling people's stories, is something that we try and capture in our displays. And it's a really good way of communicating to audiences and visitors, because it means that they can see themselves reflected, at least to some degree, in our collections, which aren't necessarily always that diverse, always that accessible. When we redisplayed the galleries over 10 years ago now, we made a big effort to try and incorporate the stories of women. One of the women's stories we tell is the story of a rural district nurse called Jean Young. So she's sort of working in the 1940s. And there's an amazing series of photographs that featured in an article in Farmers Weekly back in the 40s. So it's sort of possibly 40s, maybe early 50s, can't quite remember. But this series of photos captures her working day in the countryside, going and visiting people, actually having those kinds of encounters that you were probably having as a physiotherapist. Then on top of that, layered is presumably a press photographer following her around or joining her on her journey, sort of trying to capture some of that intimacy and sort of engagement with different people in different rural spaces. There's a set of them that make their way into the printed magazine article. But there are more photos. When you delve back into the Farmers Weekly press photo archive, which we also hold, there are other photos that never made it into the article that perhaps have been discarded by the editor for some reason, maybe not enough space, maybe they're just not quite as good, or maybe they're not telling the story quite as well. I wonder whether you could tell us, how many photos do you take, and how do you choose which photos you're going to incorporate into the panels for 40 Farms, you're going to put in the book, you're going to put out on the socials? What's the editorial process?
Oh, well, the process for 40 Farms is maybe slightly different to a lot of my other commercial commissions. And I ended up with about 72,000 images on the back of shooting for 40 Farms. But that's because you're getting a lot of movement. You can't stage what's happening on the farm the same. Whereas if I do a commercial photography and I'm photographing a chef at work, I could just say, well, just move there. So I had to just literally photograph what was happening. So a lot of them didn't have any context. They didn't have any value. But I needed to capture it in order to then get the one that did, that the composition was right. The sheep was in the right place. Maybe both its feet had been off the floor in a previous one, or the dog had its eyes shut. You know, there's an awful lot where I actually just literally went through and went, no, throw. Obviously, there were some that we planned. And I'm influenced by a photographer called Jans Bertrand. He produced a book in 1999 called Good Breeding. And it's an exemplar from the Paris Agricultural Show of incredible absolute units. And you'll have to dig out the book. It's tremendous. He photographs the most beautiful, high-quality livestock in the most unusual ways. And I wanted to almost recreate some of those, because in the book there's some beautiful livestock that I wanted to show off and really show this high quality livestock. And that influence, I could feel it coming through when I'm photographing my subjects. But just going back a step was that I'm actually self-taught. So other than a 6-week evening class at the local arts centre, I just taught myself how to use my camera through, thanks to YouTube and photography magazines, and swallowing everything out there because I'm a little obsessed about it. But I think because I'm not influenced through a degree programme where I've had to study significant influential photographers in the past, I've created my own style and my focus of what I want to photograph. And I think that actually helps. I haven't been defined by past photographers. I've been allowed to have the freedom to express myself. And so the actual creative process was easier because I wanted to tell the stories that I knew I wanted to tell. I wasn't influenced by anybody else. Dave, my publisher, my editor, we obviously talked about which farms we were going to cover, what themes those farms were going to project. And it was then left to me to go and gather the stories and gather the images. Of course, visiting 40 farms as a professional photographer, I would often access places where people hadn't ever been with a professional camera. At times of day where the light was beautiful and processing happening where you don't normally see backstage, behind the scenes in that sort of environment. So I felt really privileged. A lot of my photography I feel privileged about is that I could go in there, capture those things happening, knowing fine well a lot of people actually haven't seen these scenes happen. And because I'm not driven by influences, I could create my own images out of them, tell my own stories. But then it found it really hard to work out which pictures to put in each chapter of the book. So, of course, every farm I visited, some farms were a lot more photogenic. Some farms were maybe I had to visit them on a day where the forecast wasn't brilliant, but it's Cumbria, and I had to tell the real story, and the weather was vile a lot of the time. We had a range of images that I had to really condense. And so I would send my publisher maybe 20 to 50 of my top images with the narrative, and he would edit it down, whittle it down, and pick very subjectively. Because at the end of the day, photography is art, and art is totally and utterly subjective. And I really valued his subjectivity to look at it and say, actually, that picture tells the story better than that one. So I knew which were my key hero images, and I knew those straight away. But as far as being able to tell the rest of them, I would give him the selection and he would pull out which ones fit. And even once we did the first draft of the book, there was then another selection process where I don't actually like that one and I don't like that one. That one's not very good either. One of the pressures I did feel is that this was going to be a significant portfolio for me, and I had to make sure that technically it had to be really, really spot on, because I realised as the progress of the book was being made that this was going to showcase me and my work. And so I felt that pressure a little bit, but I respond to pressure really nicely, and it was just like, yeah, bring it on. Let's show what I can do. And it was lovely to be able to do that.
I think it's extraordinary thinking about that process of whittling down 72,000 photographs to enough to fill a book.
Well, you asked about archiving, and of course I've still got all those photographs still on my hard drive. It's less than 72 now, so I will go through. So all the ones that are blurred, they just get, instantly discounted, because I do take blurred photographs. I'm not perfect. But I've still got this very generous archive, and I'm desperately trying to keyword them at the time and keep the keywords attached to the images so I can find them quickly. But now I do get people, agricultural journalists, asking for various images. Have I got something on this? I'll get people designing web pages. And so I can very quickly pull them out. And now the book's been out for a while. We haven't got any exclusivity with them. And I can then resell them. And I think that's really important, because they are a snapshot in time, but the work is there. It's been done. I'm not having to recreate new work. And also it's a way of being able to improve my income, because being a photographer is very challenging.
And being a farmer as well. I mean, yes. as we talked about last time, it's diversification is really important.
It is, and I am our farm diversification, 100%.
I think that talk of keywording the photographs and careful collections management will be music to the ears of my archivist colleagues, who over on the other side of the building are managing an archive. I think we described it as being 1 million plus photographic items. And what that really means is there are thousands and thousands of glass plate negatives, thousands and thousands of film negatives. There's film reels, there are prints, there are copy prints, there are huge numbers of images. In amongst those, you can sort of tell the story of images. So the story of the absolute unit image can be told through the resultant publication that it featured in, the original negative, the index card that was the publication's way of managing that process of keywording the photos that they had and they were archiving. There are so many replications of those images. So on top of your 72,000, or whittled down a little bit from 72,000, there are going to be so many reproductions of your work out there in the world as well. So these things are sort of expansive, even if you're trying to cut them back.
Of course, they wouldn't have used the keyword absolute unit on their label.
That's
but
true.
we do now on our online catalogue.
I actually have some on my catalogue now that I call absolute units.
Yeah, I added the keyword to our online database.
Yeah, it's on my database too. You've got a lot to be answered.
Amazing. Wow.
So that commercial component of your work resonates. So even if you're not sort of consciously building on the back of a sort of long line of rural photographers who've gone before you, I mean, I think your work has been likened to the work of James Revilius. You're the contemporary James Revilius. That's amazing. He was an extraordinarily talented photographer. But there are huge numbers of collections that we hold that are really about that commercial story. It's about making an income from photography that's actually quite sort of jobbing photography. So particularly the work of commercial photographers like Eric Guy and Philip Collier. These are extensive collections. Philip Collier and Eric Guy actually had a collaboration at one point. They worked together. Philip Collier was one of those photographers who went out and photographed all of the villages in a particular area and, would then produce postcards and greetings cards from those. So there's an income stream there. Eric Guy was in some ways much more focused on the farming. So his work captured mid-20th century changes in farming, these extraordinary shifts from horse-based agriculture to mechanized agriculture. So these really atmospheric shots of heavy horses pulling a plough coming up over the brow of a hill. And then also these extraordinary shots of mid-century farmers looking heroic on their tractors, ploughing the new furrow of a green revolution way of farming. Your photography, as we spoke about in the last episode, is capturing a different kind of transition. And I think it's doing it in different ways. The hero farmers that you have are personal farmers, they're individual farmers, they're contextualized within particular forms of farming practice. It's beautifully done. And you use a range of different techniques within that. So those drone shots, but also individual portraits up close, inside the house, inside the farm buildings, outside in the landscape. Can you talk a bit about how the technology plays into that and how that's sort of formed as a body of work? Because it's really innovative. It's different to what's come before, as you said, and that's born directly out of your creative skills and practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned earlier that I'd won the British Life Photography Award, and part of the prize was a significant amount of Sony equipment. And I have to say I'm delighted because at that time they were the absolute pioneers of something called animal eye autofocus and human eye autofocus. So I can lift my camera up with an autofocus setting and it will actually use AI to detect the eye of the subject that I'm photographing. And eyes are really important to be in focus. When we talk to each other, we look at our eyes. When we look at pictures of things, we want the eyes to be in focus. It's absolutely crucial because otherwise our brain isn't comfortable and we won't keep looking at that image. So I went on and carried on building my supplies of Sony equipment, which is beautiful quality. And then I've expanded into getting a drone because what happened when I was photographing 40 farms is each of the farm, I wanted an image to show the farm in context of its environment. So what I would do is before, if it was a farm that I wasn't aware of and I wasn't familiar with, I'd look on a map and have a look at the contours and see where it lay in response to the environment and then plan a walk up the hill to then photograph that farm in the extent of its environment. And I was sat up on top of a hill on a very cold winter's day amongst a bit of freshly fallen snow and thought there must be an easier way to this. And I literally sat up there, got my phone out and bought a drone because I thought, I need a drone. This is going to save my legs. And it was brilliant. It made such an impact because suddenly I could get a completely different viewpoint, whether it was cows coming in for milking or where the farm sits in relation to the environment. There's a really funny story where I flew it through Simon Rogan's Michelin-Starred Polytunnels, and he has a farm just outside Cartmel. And
I think that's the first time that sentence has ever been spoken.
It's super. It's a brilliant story. Have I got time to tell you it?
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant. So Simon Rogan is in my book with his farm, Our Farm, and it champions the farm to fork movement. So 2 miles outside of Cartmel, where he has his 3-star Michelin Longclume restaurant, he has a farm called Our Farm, and they produce everything that you eat in Longclume is produced from that farm. And whilst I was shooting for 40 Farms, I was collecting footage, moving footage and drone pictures that would really enhance these stories. And I wanted to fly my drone through his beautifully manicured polytunnels, capturing the microherbs that go on. You can imagine the beautiful 3-star food. But it had obstacle detection receptors on this drone, and I couldn't get it to go through the doorway. And everybody's watching me. There was a load of people, obviously I'm visiting the farm for the day. And I'm trying to work out in my manual how to turn them off. And eventually I got them to turn off and I flew through the doors. And then I realised the downdraft of the drone was throwing all the microherbs and damaging them. So I just needed to try and get out of this polytunnel really quickly. And I crashed into the door at the end. It's like, oh yes, I've crashed it before. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. And it wasn't. So I think I went through 3 drones whilst producing the book, which luckily they were insured. But the drone really opens up a totally different perspective for my photography. And I think I mentioned earlier that I'm not driven and hindered by how I should photograph, and I like to create my own images. And so again, using the drone is just a brilliant way of capturing a different angle.
In the previous episode, we talked about the 4th agricultural revolution, this idea that farming is being transformed currently by changes in tech. So thinking about, AI, drones, and it's really interesting comparing your photographic practice to the developments in farming themselves. You're kind of using similar equipment to document farming as farmers are using to, produce crops. And
yeah, it's funny you should say that, but I've actually gone and checked our sheep with our drone.
Wow.
When my husband is having a cup of tea and he said, I haven't checked the sheep in that field. How far does your drone go? And we'll both look together and I'll just go, can you go and see if that sheep's finished lambing yet? And another occasion we'd fly the drone and we'd both be looking at the screen together. And it's like, yeah, no, it's had its lamb. You don't need to go back to that field.
That's using the not just the same kind of technology, but the exact item. Yeah, wow.
And in fact, arable farmers use drones an awful lot to try and work out where the wet spots are, have a look at the dry spots, see how well crops are taken, because you get better perspective from the air. And they used to employ helicopters and aeroplanes to fly over it and to judge how well the crop's taken. And of course, drones are so much cheaper.
I was having a fascinating conversation recently with Deb Reed, who is curator of the Henry Ford Museum in the States and one of the sort of preeminent experts in agricultural heritage and rural life and the history of farming in the US. And she was telling me about the process of trying to track down one of the early pioneering drones that were used, American-built drones that were used in exactly that kind of innovative practice in either maybe pesticides or spraying or perhaps even sort of livestock management, but using them in agricultural context. Now, a lot of them are imported from elsewhere. Maybe we could talk more about trade deals, but maybe we shouldn't. But I think there's a really fascinating history in terms of those technologies of how you look at the landscape. I think there's something in that because in childhood, the gallery in the museum about model farming, all about play farming and toy farms and carpet farming, as it's sometimes referred to, has that bird's eye perspective. We're kind of acculturated into thinking about the landscape from above. We think about it through maps. It's a sort of particular way of viewing and thinking about things. And I wonder whether that new perspective is something that we miss from that mid-20th century period in farm photography. We have aerial photography that comes from the wartime experience. There's a particular photographer whose archive we hold, John Tarleton, who trained with the RAF. So that sort of landscape view is something that is also incredibly useful to farmers. They want to be able to see the land from above.
It was really interesting, Ollie, what you were saying about Philip Collier and his approach in the 20th century to photograph the villages, because, of course, now in the 21st century, we've got the access to drones. And previously, there were people like the influential photographer that I found influenced by Jans Bertrand. He actually has a series of coffee table books you probably are familiar with, Earth from the Air. And he was one of the first photographers to go up in a helicopter and photograph the heart-shaped islands and the beautiful lakes and things like that from the air. And so I'm probably more aligned with him than anyone, but I'm using a drone now. But interestingly, going back to the 20th century photographer, I've started my next project, which is 40 villages, and I'm going to be photographing those villages and the stories from those villages in the 21st century and the conversations of change of those villages. That they are going to be based in Cumbria. And there's some seriously significant conversations to be had about how the 21st century is impacting those villages, particularly in such a cherished landscape. But the drone, again, comes into its own because I can't afford to hire a helicopter to fly over them. And there's no need now, we've got drones. But the implication of having a drone and actually being a registered drone flyer and have your operational ID and being able to have the drone conduct and be insured and everything throws up other impacts. And I still get people, I feel really uncomfortable flying a drone because people don't like it. They like it sort of an invasion of their privacy almost, that I'm capturing pictures from up there instead of down here.
There is a whole angle on drone use in the countryside that we haven't really touched on, which is they're used by criminals to sort of scope out farms. They're a really big worry. So farm theft is a major issue. And rural crime, I think, is something we'll hopefully pick up on in a future podcast. We've yet to identify the right person to speak to. So if you,
we were asked about that on social media.
Yeah, if there's anyone out there who knows a lot about rural crime and feels like they could talk about that both in terms of the past, the present, and the future, then we'd love to talk to you.
But please, no perpetrators.
Yeah, and don't be flying your drones over our museum garden because
don't give anybody ideas.
No. It's striking, in the previous episode, we talked about the fact that farmers are having to adapt at this enormous rate at the moment, which is so at odds with the pace of, the farming calendar and the seasons. It is really interesting that farmers are having to adapt to this same technology that's being used, in so many different areas of life. And I guess that's inevitable. That's how the world works. But I can see that it does place an enormous onus on farmers to not only be doing this really difficult isolated work, but also to be having to constantly learn new skills and innovate as well.
Yeah, and there is a rise in rural crime, and as food becomes more expensive, there's frequently stories in the media of sheep rustling, and people finding butchered animals in the corner of the fields and all the stock's gone. And that's why a lot of farmers will check their stock every day anyway, but they do for health reasons. But even things like having trackers on your quads and stuff like that. And I make a really strong case when people come to my farm to photograph that we don't advertise the tractors, the quad bikes and things like that. And we don't put the location down because it's a risk of our own equipment. It does have a big factor in it.
I'm reminded of the fact that we have a quad bike in the galleries, and that quad bike was acquired legitimately, I might add, to provide opportunities for people to sit on something in the galleries. So they often want to sit on the tractors. The tractors sit back from the displays on plinths. You're not supposed to touch them. We're trying to collect things and keep them safe for future generations. This quad bike was acquired so that people could have something to sit on, but it was also acquired so that we could have a VR experience, so that people could have a slightly more immersive sense of what it's like to be in the countryside, even though they're sitting on a quad bike in a gallery static in the middle of Reading. So, Joe, do you want to very briefly tell us a bit about the VR experience?
Yeah, we just have a 360 video of a farmer on a quad bike with a 360 camera on his helmet, and it just captures him driving out and herding his sheep. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, because it's on YouTube, and it's a very nice watch, even if you're not using a VR headset.
Brilliant. I've got a lovely visual journey of farming in Cumbria also on YouTube, and I think you could share that.
Oh, please send us it, yeah.
The reason I really like showing that sort of stuff is at the end of the day, the exhibition will finish here. I've got another exhibition over in Whitehaven that's got the indoor exhibition for 40 farms, and they will finish. And I am looking for a permanent home for these exhibitions going forwards. There's too much valuable work for it just to be packaged up and sat in my barn. So if there is anybody who would really love to give 40 farms a permanent home, please get in touch with me.
Yeah, there's an amazing collection, Amy, and I think it's part of that legacy of photography and ways of capturing and recording and telling the story of the countryside. It's just reminded me of a project that occurred well over 100 years ago, late 19th century. A man called Sir Benjamin Stone tried to set up a national photographic survey of the United Kingdom, and it was designed precisely to do this, to sort of capture a record of life out there in the world. It didn't have a particular farming focus, and it wasn't always as successful as it could have been, but it had particular regional successes, and some of those legacies, some of the archives sit distributed across Birmingham, the V&A, and also pockets in Cambridge and Oxford. So photography does have a long life in museums and collections, and there will be a home, I am sure, for your work. And your book is already on the shelves of the library here at the Museum of English Rural Life. So that's wonderful. I wonder whether we might just finish by touching on a couple of direct links between here and your project. So we have on display in the galleries a cardboard farm protest sign made by Helen Rebanks, who you mentioned, I think, in this episode, possibly in the last episode. Her farm and her husband James's farm is one of the farms that features in the book. It's an extraordinary farm. I've briefly visited it. I'm hoping to go back at some point. Shortly before 40 Farms came to the Museum of English Rural Life, and shortly before we installed the exhibition, another farmer called Greg Nicholson actually came with his wife to visit the museum, wandered around the galleries. I spoke to him during a gallery tour, and then somehow discovered that his work featured in your project as well. So that was another amazing link. And the other final link that I think is really significant, because this is one that will touch on huge numbers of people's lives, is that there is the farm behind the T-Bay services on the M6. So if you've driven up the M6 motorway, there is a particular service station that is rooted in a family farm history. And also, if you've driven down the M5, they've also branched out into Gloucester services as well.
And now into Scotland, they own Cairn Lodge.
There you
outside
go.
Glasgow.
Yeah. So many service stations connected to one family who are behind a particular farm that features in the book. I think it's just extraordinary to find these links, and I hope that loads of people come and see the exhibition while it's still here. I hope that they look at the book, engage with your work, and find those connections themselves.
I think that's absolutely vital, and that's what the whole project was about, was building connections with the public, not just about how our landscapes are managed, but understanding the people who are running them as businesses and behind that, but equally making the choices 3 times a day of what we choose to eat. And British agriculture is doing a brilliant job. We've got some of the highest, UK has the highest welfare across the whole world for the livestock production. And we just produce some fantastic quality food here in this country. And if people can understand that through my stories and make better choices, then everybody's going to be better off.
And your book is a wonderful testament to that as well. So it's been a privilege to...
Thanks, Joe.
Well, it's a privilege to feature the exhibition here, but also to be chatting with you in these last 2 episodes.
Yeah. My brother came to visit weekend before last, and he drove down the M6, and they stopped at that service station, and they bought me a pork pie. So I can attest to the fact that it was a delicious pork pie.
You should have said I could have brought you one. They're only around the corner from me.
I would love us to go up to that service station and do a video from there. Maybe we could meet you there, Amy.
Do you know what? I think we can do a podcast there. Definitely. I'd love that.
About T-Bay service station.
Yeah.
I have in fact had a wander around Gloucester services with the academic and historian Rosemary Shirley. Rosie Shirley works at the University of Leicester. She invited me to meet her at Gloucester services and think about the service station as a kind of museum. Is it a museum space? Is it a gallery space? Is it serving that same function of communicating to the vast millions of people who stop there to buy fuel, to top up their supplies, to have their lunch? And it's an amazing space.
It's a wonderful metaphor. I never thought of service station as museum before.
We need to branch out into, selling fuel.
Petrol. Yeah. Well, diversification.
Yeah,
I suppose
exactly.
that's a wonderful way to end, is, as much as we've talked about Amy's diversification and the diversification of farming, this podcast is one of the many ways in which we're diversifying as a museum. Long gone are the days where we can just be a museum with galleries, and it's...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good luck to you.
Thank you very much. All right. Thanks so much for listening. And thank you once again, Amy, for being with us.
Thank you, Joe. And thanks, Ollie. It's been brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Absolute Units. Your hosts have been me, Ollie Douglas, and my colleague and producer, Joe Vaughan.
Absolute Units is made possible by the support of Arts Council England and Museums Partnership Reading, our partnership with Reading Museum.
If you're enjoying the pod, please leave us ratings and reviews wherever you're listening, and share it on social media, because all of this massively helps us reach new listeners.
Massively.
It
really does.
Enormously.
It's a significant help.
Absolute unit of a help.
Maybe we should, each time moving forward, we should increase the size
of the help.
Yeah, we can explore this. We'll workshop this.
Well, the more subscribers we get and the more listeners we get, the more help we get.
Like the hog.
Yeah.
It gets
I mean,
bigger.
unless we put them off.
Yeah, that's true.
In which case, it's
in
diminishing
which case
returns, frankly.
In which case, we'll shrink the size of the support down.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's do that.
We'll be reasonable, yeah.
You need some sort of animal to reflect the growth and contraction of the pod.
I can't think of animals contracting, though. No, one to explore possibly in a future episode.
Yeah, that's a lambing time episode.
Yeah. Before we get into that, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with writer and academic Katrina Navikas for the first of 2 episodes exploring the history of the commons.
So we get into the significance of the commons on commoners' lives, the complexity of what the commons actually means, and lots of fascinating stories of resistance and protest, which are bound up in the same histories of land and land access.
We'll see you then.
Or you might hear us.
Yeah. You'll hear from us soon. You'll hear from our people.
Yeah, and we won't see you.
We won't see you.
Yeah, we're not watching you.
Unless.
That's really sinister.